I'm going to ask Mark Webber from the Computer History Museum. He's got a quick announcement to make about donations and some transcripts that are available for the press of conversations that took place quite a while ago. And then I'll call upon Steve to come up and join us. So sorry, Steve, just a second. Mark, if you're here to... He ain't here. Okay, let's put this whole thing on hold for 30 seconds and I'll go find him. Sorry, guys. Is Mark Webber here? I think not too. Okay, Steve, do you want to carry on, and we'll have Mark come up at the end of the session. Okay.
Very good. Okay. Thank you. Maybe we could have somebody start to shut the doors so we could, we're not disturbed by the noise. But what we wanted to do in this next section is to really focus on, are there lessons that we can learn from the process that conceived the internet? And so we want to take a look at what we think are a couple of areas that you've heard about this morning. The first panel, we want to think about the interplay between government, academia, and industry that we heard about this morning, how important that was to the creation of the Ethernet, and really take a view of how did that work back then, and then what are the lessons we could learn, and what are the lessons that apply to today, because it's a different world. And the other two panels, we will focus on architecture and standards, which again, we've heard a lot of discussion about this morning. So with that, I'm really pleased to welcome this august panel. I'm going to steal from Paul and do the haiku introductions. And we have Judy Estrin, and Bridge is really a great overview of Judy. And in addition, Closing the Innovation Gap, which is a book she's written that directly addresses this topic we're going to discuss about today. Bill English and the mouse are really almost synonymous, or should be if they're not to you. Paul Graham's NASA. Bill Spencer and PARC, one of my predecessors at PARC. And I think I've captured everybody. So maybe Yogan, I'm sorry, geez, thank you. Yogan, Claris, and Metaphor. I think represent some of Yogan's significant contributions. So to begin, I thought it might be useful to have the two Bills really start with Bill Spencer. Tell us a little bit about how academic, industry, and government collaboration did work back at PARC around the time of the creation of the Ethernet, and his view of, what worked, what didn't, and what we might learn from that.
Okay, Steve. Is this on? It sounds like maybe it's an echo. Two things you learn when you've been around as long as I have, and those are, don't follow Bob Metcalf and John Schock in talking, because they're both very eloquent. They're both full of stories that trace back to, I think. But I want to go back and talk about PARC just a minute. And let me set the context for it. I came there as a relatively young researcher and manager at a critical time. PARC had been broken into two parts at the end of the 1990s. And anybody who was there can remember the tremendous infighting over everything at that time. Also, if you remember, does anybody here remember the articles that came out in Fortune by Bro Utah about the lab that ran away from Xerox? Anybody here? A few. What about Doug Smith's book about fumbling the future? Those were there when I arrived in a lab that had been split into two parts. However, it was a very innovative and productive place during the 1970s and 1980s. The work that you heard about this morning in Ethernet certainly had an input partly from federal government, as well as an environment that Xerox had set up that allowed a great deal of freedom in approaching problems. George Pake, when he put this lab together, said that don't ask me for 10 years for any return to Xerox. Well, 10 years were up in the early 80s. And let me describe one other example of a tie between research that was done at PARC with a lot of collaboration with universities, funded partly by the federal government, that resulted in a company that had fairly good returns to both Xerox, the starters of that company, as well as the early investors. I still run into time to time and people in San Francisco who invested in this company. Xerox had an interest in laser printing. As a result of that, there was a major research effort in solid-state lasers with the belief it could be applied to laser printing and improve the quality and reduce the cost with solid-state devices. A lot of that work was funded by DARPA at the time. In the mid-'80s, or a little before that, Spectrophysics approached us about the possibility of forming a company that would be funded by Spectrophysics with technology from Xerox and manufacture laser diodes. The ties to universities were mostly through the students that we hired in those days. Xerox, like Bell Labs, where I was when I came to Xerox, had extensive university ties, a lot of students there, faculty there in the summers for sabbaticals, and a lot of our scientists went back to universities to lecture, sometimes to stay there and teach for a year or so. So strong ties to the universities as a source of good people and some good ideas. The agreement between Spectrophysics and Xerox was we would form a company, Spectrophysics would manage it, would provide the fundings for it, and Xerox would provide the technology and some of the key people. Now you have to remember, this is a time in which Bob had started 3Com, Chuck Geschke and John Warnock had left to do Adobe, Tu Chen left to do Comag, Charles Simoni went to Microsoft, and you can argue over what he took with him to work on Microsoft Word. So the articles and books that were appearing about Xerox being able to generate interesting ideas but not able to commercialize them was a real issue for us. This joint venture, I think, set a trend for research labs that I hadn't seen at Bell Labs or in my ties with IBM or any of the other universities, now perhaps any of the other major industries. Now, maybe they were, and I just didn't know about them. But anyway, this was set up, and this new company started. The advantage was they had higher power laser diodes, more efficient than anybody else had been able to make up at that point. Company was highly successful. There's a lot of humorous stories about it. I'll save those for questions if you want to ask. At the top of the dot-com bubble in 1999, that company was sold for $41 billion. That's with a B, almost up to today's standards of companies that went out. Xerox ownership in that company was 40%. The other companies that we started out, we spun out in the mid-'80s, we owned smaller amounts, but the total amount that Xerox could have returned from those investments, had they kept their ownership until the late 90s, would have endowed the entire research program, not just PARC, at Xerox. But for reasons that I didn't understand then, I don't understand now, we sold our equity much sooner.
So that's an example of a successful collaboration.
Could a couple of questions, a couple of things from that I want to make a point. One is, I think those research labs like Xerox PARC, IBM, Bell Labs, others are no longer in existence today. That source of new ideas and ways to make new companies does not exist today. Secondly, I think the funding as a result of this, the funding of new ideas is hurting. But I think those companies that were able to start in the mid-'80s, and there were 4 of them, 3 of which were successful, were an example of how government funding at a research lab like PARC was, with close ties to universities, was a way to generate new ideas and to take those ideas to the market successfully.
Thank you. So I think I'd like to spend a little time now thinking about how those apply to today. So, Judy, I know you've got some opinions on whether we're approaching this in the right way today or not. So maybe you could share those.
We all talk a lot about innovation, and there's clearly lots of innovation going on, but if we were in today's environment back when Bob and everybody else here were working on many of the inventions you saw, it wouldn't get funded and it wouldn't have gotten done. And there are really 2 fundamental changes today, I think, in what I call the innovation ecosystem. And the first is that the funding is very different. So government funding for basic science is not only down, but it is allocated in a different way. The way the DoD used to fund basic research is very different than what we have today. And NSF is great, but it can't address all of the problems that we have. So we have not enough funding going into the really early, crazy discovery capital that are really the seed corn that leads to this. But more apropos to what we're hearing about today and what was just talked about is we're missing the role that the labs played was less the basic research than the translational applied research. Taking some of those basic concepts and being able to invent and then try at scale. What was so phenomenal about Xerox PARC is it wasn't just an idea, but it was the proof of the concept and being able to iterate on those ideas until they worked well enough that a little startup called Bridge or 3Com or someone else could actually take those ideas and make them work with a small amount of funding. So we're missing this translational piece, and it is falling on either the universities to try to come up with novel ways to do it and not always successful, or large corporations who tend to only focus on areas that are helping their short-term bottom line. So we're missing a piece today in that innovation system that venture capitalists can't fund and large corporations can't because of their focus on short-term profits. So we do have a problem. I think there are a number of ways of addressing those. Nonprofits are coming in, the Gates Foundation, other ways of funding, but we need to be looking at that whole cycle, or 20 years from now, we're not going to have the type of innovation that we have today that is being built on all of the things that were done 40 years. I keep saying 20 years ago, but I'm getting older and older, so I should start saying 40 and 50 years ago. So.
Well, I think there's maybe two follow-ons for that. Maybe I'd like to hear maybe from Paul on NASA's view of that, how basic and applied, and then Yogan, you spent a career as a venture fund investor, and is this really a problem, or do we have a more efficient way to do it? So,
federal government funding has diminished, unfortunately. But it's still quite prevalent. Before I came today, I just went to the National Science Foundation website, and they have 23 pages of solicitations for new funding opportunities. Unfortunately, most of these funding opportunities are less than $500,000. Some or most are actually far less than that. And also the emphasis is more on quick rate of return. I know that I have sat on a number of boards where we do their evaluations, and usually we look at like a 5-year return on investment, something that can help us now. Basic research seems to be, emphasis seems to be diminishing, and we need the basic research to build the foundation for the great scientific breakthroughs that require this. Also, funding for education, encouraging majors in engineering, science has to continue.
Well, from my perspective, when you think about what government, academia, and industry have done, it's really doing discovery or enabling discovery, enabling innovation, and industry enables entrepreneurship that is actually bringing that innovation to the marketplace. And I think in the past we had academia represented by universities as well as these specialty research labs like PARC, BBN, SRI, and other places that Judy alluded to, and those are no longer players. So you're really left with government, academia, universities, and industry that is the entrepreneurs. Unfortunately, today you're seeing all the, quote, innovation being redefined as really talking about entrepreneurship. Venture capitalists and entrepreneurs are really taking innovation out of academic environments and commercializing it. And I think we all feel that the well's running dry in terms of where is the new discovery coming from. It isn't going to be in the markets that we understand today, but it's going to be in the markets of tomorrow, or the businesses that will be important tomorrow. Bob, alluded in his presentation about new markets, whether they be energy, medicine, or healthcare, or education. You've got to have breakthroughs. So who's going to fund this breakthrough? When I was at Xerox, people weren't preoccupied with creating an idea and then going out and raising venture capital and making millions and millions of dollars. That came after the innovation had been created. They had free reign of doing what they wanted to do and make real breakthroughs occur. And I think we've got to create an environment. Is it the Genius Awards that many of the successful entrepreneurs are creating or not? But we really have to go back to the discovery phase and have discovery convert itself into innovation before entrepreneurs can take that innovation and bring it to the mass market.
I think the other thing that has fundamentally shifted from, again, when a lot of us started our careers is that the breakthroughs that are, and nobody should think for a minute that there aren't scientists out there starving for that funding, because the amount of activity, I sit on the advisory board of the BioX Institute at Stanford, and the level of creativity and new ideas and problems that really need to be solved in the intersection of biology and engineering and chemistry, that's what the X stands for with biology, is phenomenal. But for every one of those researchers, every one of those scientists are just starving for money. But the main thing I want to say is what's very different today is that everything has become much more interdisciplinary. And so it doesn't fit, at least on the research side, it doesn't fit into the clean boxes that it did at the beginning of the computer industry, because we were building a new era in the technology segment. Now it is about applying technology to brain research, or applying technology to diseases, or applying technology not just to illnesses, but to wellness and managing wellness. So I think that, or education, as Bob said in his presentation. So I think the funding issues have actually become more complex, because you no longer can go to a single, the funders can no longer fund in boxes. You can't have someone who's an expert in technology, or an expert in healthcare, or an expert in energy, or think about the NIH separate from NSF or DARPA, because everything crosses over. And so I think the way you fund and the way you make decisions to fund has become more complex, because the problems we have to solve require interdisciplinary solutions.
So, Bill English, you spent some time at a, SRI, significant government funding, PARC, a corporate research lab. Any observations, from your experiences?
Well, an observation relative to government funding, I think that depends largely on individuals in the government. Bob Taylor is an outstanding example. He did more than anyone I know in terms of funding all levels of research. And I don't see that happening today. I think today our government has devolved to the point where the question asked in any case of funding is how it plays politically, and that's unfortunate. I don't know how we'll get past that.
So we're too afraid of the Golden Fleece Award to fund the right things?
I'm sorry, I have trouble hearing you, but...
I'm sorry, I was saying that, so we're afraid of there was the famous senator who awarded the Golden Fleece Award for kind of the stupidest research, and so we become afraid of funding the outlandish. At NASA, are there any outlandish things?
We have we used to have the SETI Institute at NASA at one time, but that became sort of unpopular, so it was moved out, so now it's an independent organization. But that's an example of like the Golden Fleece Award. No one was interested in little green people, so that project got outsourced.
And privatized.
Yes, it did, yes.
So is there, so a couple questions that brings to my mind is, one is we're talking about the U.S. Is there anything that we can learn from other countries and adopt? And, privatization maybe has a role here. And so what do people think about that? The Gates Foundation, Genius Awards, how would we, how would we leverage those, or are those a bad idea?
I don't want to monopolize it, but I guess you asked two questions. One is privatization is not a bad idea, and no, it's not, just as long as it is in balance with other forms of funding. The one issue with privatization, if you look at industry is driven by short-term returns right now, and so it's very hard for industry to fund the type of work we need. If you look at privatization in terms of the ultra-wealthy and foundations, actually there's a lot of great work going on there, whether it's the MacArthur Foundation or the Coulter Foundation or the Gates Foundation. And I think there it's individuals. If you have the right individuals making the decisions, because it's not just about how much money, it's about how the decisions are made, what to fund, and whether or not you're willing to take risks, and whether or not you're willing to fund something that people think is crazy, because if you're not funding some of those crazy ideas, you're not going to end up with the right portfolio. So I think that solves part of the problem, but we can't look to that as solving all the problem. We need the right balance. And when you talk about other countries, I think there are other countries that do good jobs at part of this. In China, they do a better job investing in science and research, but not the whole cycle. I still think that we have an edge when you look at the areas that Yogan was talking about in terms of the whole ecosystem of going from scientific discovery through to actual innovations that can help people solve problems. And the one country that comes close, not so much in basic research, but in the rest of the cycle, is Israel. And they do have the funding, the government involvement, and probably because of the strong investment that the military there needs to make and the training of people, I would say comes the closest to what we have here. But I haven't seen any other. I've seen other countries that do a better job in policy or a better job in research, but certainly not in the whole ecosystem.
I don't think there's any place in the world that is a better place to take an idea to the market than the United States is. We've got an active venture world, the ability to try and succeed or fail is unparalleled anywhere in the world. I believe the university system we have is the best in the world. There's no question that we attract the very best people from all over the world. Our education system provides something that no other nation has. If you look at the top universities worldwide, 18 out of 20 are in the United States, and the 2 that aren't, I'm not sure how they got there in England. But I think we're unparalleled in those areas. The thing that's happened that I think is unfortunate is that the major industrial research labs where a lot of these ideas were baked into product have disappeared. If you look back at the history of Xerox and the Bell system where I was familiar, 1975, the government forced Xerox to give up all of its patents, which resulted in our cost to copy today being a lot less than it would have been had that stayed a monopoly. In 1984, the Bell system was broken up. That may have been a good idea, but in my view, it ruined the world's best research laboratory. I don't think the transistor, although there was a big effort at Purdue at the time, I think the transistor would have been invented had it not been, at that time, had it not been for Bell Labs. Not the 3 scientists who won the Nobel Prize for it, but the support activity they had from other people who were eminent scientists, and were not recognized the way those 3 were. So we're ahead in those areas. Are we going to be able to stay? I'm not sure. The thing that concerns me the most is that we have lost the lead in our industrial laboratories.
It seems to me, just a comment on that, that Google is one of those companies that is really pushing the envelope on just about anything in terms of being bold, you know. I mean, you wouldn't think a search company wanted to create driverless cars, but they are. And so it's these kinds of initiatives that you're never quite sure of where they'll land up, is what Xerox PARC and SRI and all these places did. They devoted corporate R&D dollars not just for the next obvious product, but for something that was possibly going to be a couple of generations away. And you might think, well, if Google Maps is an important part of their core technology, then driverless cars maybe fits that particular innovation thread or timeline.
I think in those areas where you look at Facebook and Google and the companies who started on building on ideas that were taken from a number of places and using technology that's there is just outstanding. And those are examples of universities contributing to this. I think that's important. We need to keep that. I think we're missing it in a number of other places other than that area.
Well, but just to, I would differentiate between Facebook and Google in this area, and I think what Yogan was referring to was not Google proper, but the research
Google X.
Part of Google, and there's various places where that's done. And if you look in the technology industry today, it's really Google and Microsoft are the 2 companies that can afford to actually have a research arm. And the same thing happens in the pharmaceutical sector. One of the problems is, again, when you go back to the interdisciplinary nature of the problems, is that Google crosses over a little bit, but it's hard to get the crossover. The beauty of Bell Labs was the interdisciplinary nature of the people that it attracted, allowed us to, and allowed them, not us, but them to come up with a different type of invention. So there still is a big gap that we have today.
The commercial firms in the U.S., and I agree with Bill on this, are extremely effective. I know that NASA has more or less begun to encourage private firms like SpaceX and others to build space vehicles to handle the, for lack of a better word, commercialization of the near space area. One thing, however, is that commercial firms tend to be short-sighted. Most of them don't appear to be too inclined to investigate basic research for the future that builds a foundation. And that's one thing that really needs to be improved. But I think that the industry in the U.S. is vastly surpassed in an area of innovation, just unsurpassed. And that's why the government like NASA is trying to commercialization as much as possible and encourage private industry to build spacecraft and the like.
So let me, we have a few minutes left. Let's take some questions from the audience. I see I've got a hand up.
I am, sorry, Bob Emerson, freelance writer. Are Apple doing basic research? I mean, they've certainly got enough money in the bank to fund it, haven't they?
I don't think Apple has. Apple is an unbelievably innovative company and has at times done applied research and comes up with wonderful new devices that we all like that are very advanced. But I don't think they've ever believed in investing in basic research. And you know, everybody that's not judgmental. It's just saying they don't play that role in the ecosystem. And there are some corporations that feel that they have a responsibility to contribute to academic research more than others. Some do it because they feel a responsibility, some do it because they want to hire talent. And one of the things that we ought to point out, and someone was talking about the flow of people to PARC, one of the really important aspects of investing in basic research is not just the discoveries that come out of it, but it's actually the people you're training. It's those graduate students and post-grad, it's that working and learning the way of scientific thinking, and those people then go out into the world and make better innovators, better leaders, better problem solvers because they have gone through that process and spent time in a research arena. So it's not just about the ideas, it's also about the people that carry those ideas out into the world.
And you might
Steve,
argue that, as Bob, that universities are such a great place because every 4 years you get a new bunch of extremely talented people.
Sometimes longer. You were there longer.
So in the case of Ethernet, we had ARPA sponsoring research at Harvard and MIT. Then we had Xerox sponsoring research in its corporate research lab. And then we had the venture capital community sponsoring a bunch of companies, including 3Com, to commercialize it. So all the modes that you've been talking about played a role in that, successful. So what did we learn? That should we have done one of them more or one of them less, or was the balance right? I guess we're worried.
I think we learned how important all of those aspects are to the cycle, because if you had taken any of it out, I don't think we'd be where we are today in terms of where the market and the role that networking plays in everything we do. So my point is that the players in that cycle that you named all played a really important role in taking what was a phenomenal idea and getting it to a place where it is, we can't live without it.
I think we've got time for one last question.
Yeah. Just before, let me add to Bob. Bob, I think you picked an important area, but there's a couple of real weak links in that now. The Xerox PARC has changed. Bell Labs has changed. Those areas where a lot of these things came from have changed, and we've got to find a way to bring that back in some way. Can we do it in universities, in government labs? Don't know. But I think that's changed. Secondly, I think the research that you had on Ethernet and Don Cyphers had on laser diodes isn't possible today. I just don't believe that would be done today. Now, maybe I'm wrong. I've been away from that for a while, but I think those are two things that have changed dramatically in the last 20 years.
The one last question.
My name is Harsh Kumar from Intel Corporation, and what I see is that right now we have a big challenge of manufacturing, and most of the manufacturing is done offshore. It's a big research area and development cooperation among industry and the academia and the government. What do you guys think about that, and what's happening in our country on this one?
Well, I think it says there's lots of talent in other places from a research standpoint. I think the idea of globalizing research is a good idea. Those results, if they're available then to anyone, I think the environment in the United States will lead to our being able to capitalize on those better than anywhere else, no matter where the research is done.
I think globalizing research is a very important idea, but giving up research is a terrible idea. So anybody who thinks that we as a country can just innovate on other countries' investment in research is making a huge mistake. You partner well and collaborate well when you partner from a position of strength. And we need to, as we collaborate and with the whole world, we need to make sure that we still have our roots healthy, because it is not true. I don't believe it's true that we as an economy or as an innovation system and as a society can continue to thrive if we just decide to let someone else invest in the research part, and then we'll just take those ideas and do a good job bringing it to market. You can't separate it out that way.
I think we need to end here, and I'd like to thank the panel. And we'll ask the next panel to come on up. And while they are coming up, I want to set up that panel. And Ethernet, as we've seen, was really please come on up, Gordon. Was a answer to the problem of distributed computing, and how do we connect those computers and connect them to printers, in fact, as we heard this morning. But we've also heard how much what Ethernet is and the architecture has evolved. And so we want to spend a little bit of time talking about architecture, the role that it plays, and how that has affected the evolution of the Ethernet. So, and I would like to welcome our panel here. We have with us today, and again, I'm going to use the haiku introduction. Gordon Bell, and I think if I just say PDP and VAX is sufficient. Glenn Reichart really played a role in institutionalizing institution-wide lands. And Radia Pirman, we heard from this morning, spanning trees. Not 10-base tree, but spanning trees. So maybe to get the conversation started from here, how much of the original Ethernet do we actually see today?
I mean, actually, mostly just the packet format. But there's extreme confusion about, like Ethernet and IP. Aren't they basically doing the same thing, that you put your data in an envelope and it, and why do we have both of them and stuff? Now, to say it sort of controversially, people kind of think that standards bodies are kind of well-educated technologists carefully weighing engineering trade-offs, but a much more accurate way to think of it is as drunken sports fans. So I'm always trying to figure out what's the inherent difference between technology A and technology B, and nobody knows them both. So I have these two 600-page specs that are incomprehensible. If I ask an advocate for A, how does it compare with B? They say, well, A is awesome and B sucks. And then
we heard that this morning.
Right. And then you find out about some things about B that are better, and you point that out to the A people, and no problem, they steal the ideas, still saying that A is awesome and B sucks. So at any rate, people kind of assume that the architecture of the internet is like some brilliant thing, and that's why it succeeded. But in fact, it's an incredible set of kludges. The worst decision, the single worst decision in the history of mankind,
wow,
was that in 1992, people said, hey, the IP address is too small, it's 4 bytes. Why don't we replace it with ISO's version that had a 20-byte address? And actually, if we'd done that, we would have had bigger addresses now. And Ethernet sort of wouldn't have been a separate thing. So it would have been kind of the physical link that would interconnect a network. But, you know, it was all sort of not invented here kinds of things. It also had something that was technically superior to the notion of IP getting you to an Ethernet cloud and then doing Ethernet inside of the cloud. The ISO layer 3 thing had a prefix, a 14-byte prefix that got you to a cloud, and then you had this flat address space inside. Once you got there, that was the 6-byte address, and the end nodes let the routers know where they were, so you had perfect routing there. Today, you can kind of simulate that with IP getting you to a flat cloud. The flat cloud is very nice so that you can do virtualization and stuff within a data center and move around without changing your address. So you can do that with Ethernet, but when you had both of them in the same address, it was very nice. With today with IP, you get to the cloud, and then you have to do this ARP kludge to shout and say who has this address in order to convert it. So, you know, whether it was the architecture that made things succeed, no. I mean, we can get around any sort of kludge, and we do. The fact that we've lived with IPv4 this many years is astonishing, because, you know, we keep coming up with NATs and DHCP and things to enable you to do that. But back to Ethernet, yeah, it really is, as I said, CSMACD doesn't exist very much except in the wireless stuff. And other than that, it's really just like a layer 3 protocol.
Well, let me talk about some of the architectural principles
Yes.
that seem to be surviving that comes out. I think Andy Grove said, only the paranoid survive, a little book on that. You know, I think that in architecture, only the simple and flexible survive. And simple and flexible, having a vision for what it might be. I was most taken this morning, Bob, with your diagram that showed you could have an air ether, you could have a wire ether. I'm not sure if you got a water ether in there too, but you could have lots of different ethers that could go and work with this technology. And the idea of being able to visualize that this could go into other domains, have that be evolvable, has really been, I think, one of the big secrets of Ethernet, that you can go and evolve it from one medium to another, from one speed to another. And I think most critically, if you're going to have a new technology, make sure that you keep the name of the successful last technology. So the new technology gets called Ethernet too, and therefore it becomes successful by
So branding is a key architectural principle.
Branding is a key architectural principle. Would you agree with that, Gordon?
Yeah, it's like Fortran. You know, whatever we have to communicate, it's going to be Ethernet. And I think that'll exist. You know, Bill Howe just reminded me that when we announced it at the World Trade Center in, I think, 81 or 82, I had predicted this thing will last well into the 2000s. And he said, wow, I didn't know that was going to happen. So I think, again, you know, we'd like to say certainly Ethernet will last well into the 2050s or so. So I think, be safe in that.
So
I still have Ethernet. I mean, I was an electrician as a child, and so I can't imagine life without wire. Every time I move into a new apartment or building or something, the first thing I do is tear up all the ceilings and everything and lay down wire. I just don't trust wireless.
I built a custom house, and while it was still open, I went and I started installing, you know, Cat5 cable, Cat5e cable.
Cat 6, yeah.
And the joke in the neighborhood is, what is the R value of the Cat5e cables in Glenn's house? I did also, for those of you who are wireless folks, I did put in some little cubby holes in strategic places so that you can have the invisible access points, so that you can do that as well. But there's still nothing like plugging in and getting a rock-solid connection.
So are there, you know, in addition to branding, and keep it simple, stupid, are there other architectural principles that allowed for this evolution? I mean, that's kind of what we heard is, you know, well, call the latest thing and then, you know, keep it simple and be practical. Are there other architectural principles that we can learn here?
Well, I really think there are. One of the interesting things was choice of an appropriate packet size, right? Not 43 bytes, and not something that would be infinite, but something that would be a reasonable packet size. I think that having the packet size, I guess maximum, I don't know, 15 or 100 or 30 or something, has actually been one of the things that is a constant, even with a lot of the other changes that have occurred in this thing we call Ethernet.
Why is that important?
That's important because it means that people running on top of that don't have to change their programming and start using something different because something underneath changed. And that allows for a smooth evolvability, right, Radia?
Actually, I like having much bigger packet formats. Once you're not really sharing the wire, you don't really need to have a limit to the size of the packet. But what you said before about flexibility, so like English is a living language. It's full of kludges, you know, like the spelling and, you know, new words every year and whatever. But it can evolve kind of gracefully, and that's kind of an important aspect, that you can change the physical links, and you know, a lot of things we can accommodate.
Right.
Yeah.
Another thing that struck me was really the design to the most demanding application. A lot of times today we'll design to the average application, but designing to the most demanding, in the case that Bob had, it was that printing device that required so many pixels to be laid down on the paper, caused it to be designed to a level in which it could accommodate a lot of other applications. I think that was another important thing. You agree?
Well,
Brady and I can disagree. It's okay.
Right. If you design for the most, you know, strict application, I mean, there would be quality of service and reserved things and all that kind of stuff.
That's what the token ring guy said. We're reliable,
That's
right?
Yeah.
So that didn't work.
Right. So we don't really need to do that. If you're talking about having adequate speed, yes, I mean, and the more speed we get, we can manage to eat up with stupid pop-up ads and things like that. It used to be 56 KB was all you needed but yeah, right.
Well, during that era, we had pushed from it was running with at PARC at 3 or 3.3 megabits, and then we got it and we said, what's the fastest we can possibly go on these big yellow cables? And it was, okay, 10 was a nice number, and in fact, I recall in 1990, I was when I was had been away from digital, that what's with these people? We haven't moved from 10 megabits for a decade, and all kinds of things were setting in. There was a fiber channel. I don't know. It's fiber channel. There was an optical ring channel, and all of these things were coming in to replace Ethernet if they hadn't finally gotten up to raise the standard and to basically go to a hub.
Sure.
Hub architecture. That was kind of a null period.
Could I maybe switch topics slightly in the sense, but build on it in the sense of, so what we've heard is, you know, this has evolved radically from where it started and what the problem was intended to solve, from connecting a couple of hundred PCs to billions, literally across the world today. And we also heard a great quote this morning, I think, that somebody used, was about sometimes with new innovations, what we do is we pave the cow paths, right? Meaning we first try to do what we've done better. And so we've ended up with this complex architecture. And if we started over, if we could rip it out and start over, would we end up with the system we have today? And if not, can we get to where we need to be for the future from where we are today?
I don't know. I look back and I think it was kind of a very, very natural kind of evolution. Everybody has a different model of what we wanted out of Ethernet. And in fact, when digital signed on with Xerox, what we were looking for basically a simple network or switching structure to connect not PCs because we didn't have them yet, but we wanted to connect our small mini computers so that we could compete with IBM in a larger framework, because we saw the world with a number of minis in a distributed network, and all we wanted was basically a way to be able to put concentrators for terminals and to be able to have those concentrators connected to minis. That was our goal, and so 10 megabits was very important to us from that. And in fact, when I sold it within digital, it was like, well, this other thing is going to evolve, and it did evolve to the server concept, and then when I actually one of the companies I was involved with later on, we found out, hey, this doesn't really work. You need to have, you don't have a shared disk, and we're trying to use the shared disk back to a workstation. That was a bad idea. So you basically have disks on every workstation. So that whole evolution was a little bit different. So it was kind of natural. I just see it as a natural progression. Go in as simply as you can. Put the minimal, and this keeps coming up in startups all the time. What is the minimal acceptable concept? And in research, what is the minimal acceptable paper that you can write? Because you need to write a lot of papers out there. You got to get your name out there. And so what's the smallest publishable idea? So in research, we talk about this minimal publishable idea. So again, and that's why we have so much trouble with all the complaints we heard about. Oh my God, isn't it awful? We're not funding research. I say, we're probably funding it as a hell of a lot more than ever. We had funded it so well, we just got so many people out there that have to go to this big feeding trough to get federal funding. So I'm just dishing the last panel a little bit on that. Ain't it awful? I don't see it as awful at all. I don't see it as anything different than we've ever had. I see a very exciting thing. I see still constant set of great ideas and a constant set of really dumb ideas. And how could you be possibly starting a company on that? That to knock off Facebook or whatever. But I just see nothing but exciting things going ahead in terms of whether it's wireless or whatever, and we'll call a lot of them Ethernet and the internet or the web or whatever.
And it's great if we can have compatibility in these things, especially in networks.
You don't make it until you've got that transitional way. It's the transitions.
So I just have to tell you a quick story. I wanted to do a little bit of experiment to see how slower speeds and faster speeds affect networking. And if you come hear my keynote tomorrow, I'm going to tell you the results of that experiment.
Okay.
But I needed to go and slow things down. So I said, how can I slow down my network? So I went to my closet, and sure enough, I found an old Ethernet hub. And it had an AUI connector for the old, Vampire Tap, and had a BNC connector on it. Thank goodness it had a couple of 10 base T adapters, because that was what I actually had cables for these days. Plugged it in, slowed things down to 10 megabits. I hadn't had that thing out in 20 years. Plug it in, plug it to my new devices, my gigabit port, and sure enough, it all slows down to 10 megabits and does the right thing. So it was great. I was able to do this experiment in almost 0 time thanks to the compatibility from gigabit ports all the way down to the original 10 megabits for 10 base T.
So then, to my question, you don't feel we are paying any price really for this evolutionary path, that we're going to be able to evolve to where we need to get to? And if so, maybe where do you think some of those places we're evolving to, and what are some of the challenges?
Well, of course, you pay a price, but I wanted to point out the opposite, which is that you pay a price for any disruption in what happens. I think if the world started over again today, which it hasn't, but if the world started over again today, you'd probably make most things fiber-based. We would have lots of plastic fiber connectors, glass fiber connectors, and that would be the way in which we would go and wire these things together. Packet format still wants to remain simple. In fact, on some of the newest networks where you've got some software-defined networking and programmability, you can take some of the things that Layer 3 is doing move that into the control plane, and what that leaves on the data plane are things that look remarkably like, just like Ethernet packets. So it may be that the future is the past, and that the single thing that we can all agree on is the Ethernet packet. How we control it might move from a header to a control plane, but still the Ethernet packet survives.
Radia, any views?
Okay. Do you mean Ethernet or do you mean IP? But yeah, the underlying stuff. I mean, you can look at all kinds of kludges and stuff, but it doesn't matter. We can work around all that. So it's kind of uglier than it needs to be. But the internet actually doesn't really work the way that engineers envisioned it, which was that you have a DNS name and you type that in and it turns it into an IP address and then it gets routed based on that. It's actually, with NATs and people don't search for DNS names, they search for shoes. And that's one of the miracles of the internet, that you want a weird kind of shoe, you search for it on the internet, you get a bunch of vendors that you've never heard of in countries you've never heard of, and you decide which one is cheapest, and you give them your credit card, and shoes appear. I mean,
and credit card goes where?
right, and it's safe, and these vendors that you never heard of before. Yeah, by the way, another miracle to me is Wikipedia. There's sort of no excuse for that not just being filled with graffiti. The idea that anybody can edit it, and yet it seems to be like the main place that you go to for nice, well-written, concise descriptions of various technologies. So it's not exactly clear what the internet is. It really isn't the IP packet format or the Ethernet packet format. Yeah.
So John, I want to ask you your own question. What do you think?
Well, two comments. I'm not a network expert, but actually at PARC we are working on some new network technologies that, for compatibility reasons, have got to run on top of TCP/IP. But one of the things we're trying to address is security. I mean, right now, do we really want? Everything is open and unsecured, and bits flying across, and then we have to. At an application layer, worry about that. So how could we make security a network provided capability instead of an overlay that we have to manage at the application layer? That's, I think, a place we need to evolve.
Right.
But
Radia, you've been worrying about that all your life.
Right. So it's not clear what the word security means. So you can't just sort of take a technology and then say, make it secure, because secure means a whole bunch of things. Does it mean the ability to be untraceable and be a whistleblower, the ability to not get deluged with phone calls so first, I actually think that you should have a very, very simple pipe that you can send information, and any sort of privacy or anything like that should be done end to end. But there is the issue of the just starving things out with with DDoS and things like that, where people have all these client machines that are so easily compromised.
Taken over,
Right. Why we can't design simpler clients that can't, like we used to tell people, don't boot from infected floppy. Now we have to tell them, well, we've sold you this fine computer and everything's wonderful, but don't actually turn it on.
Right. The downside
don't read
of
an email. Don't open a PowerPoint presentation because any of the, right.
The downside of the network. Maybe we should see if there's some questions from the audience.
I have a question. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, we have a mic over here. Raise your hand again so they know.
Yeah, Bob Emerson again. I'm sorry, I'm always hogging the questions. Glenn semi-anticipated my question, which was to ask what is going on with software-defined networking in the internet. I mean, I'm not an expert at all, but it would my naive opinion would be there's an enormous potential there.
I think there is enormous potential there. I think that there's two things going on, well, three things maybe. The separation of the control plane and data plane, I already talked about, is actually a big deal and simplifies a number of things about how we handle packets. Second one is that in certain situations, it allows for virtualization. And it's a shortcut to virtualization. And I think network function virtualization may change business models for how networks get used. And I think that that is likely to provoke some significant changes in the internet going forward. And then the third thing is that up until very recently, the network was dumb and the endpoints were smart. And again, Radia's been working on this for a long time, and Gordon has too actually, but when you can program the network on a dynamic basis, on a per application basis, I think some very interesting things are happening. You agree, Gordon?
Yeah, but I have to reduce it to, okay, how do we do what? How do we do it, and what's the implication there? You know, the movement of control and state. There's, hey, these are all state machines, and I like to have the state that's the changing things as explicit as possible, and that sort of pushes it more out to the edge, and instead of getting it into the sort of big ball in the middle. So I worry a little bit about that when you sort of say, do you really want a smart network there or not, or just give me links between that from at the edges and dealing with quality. That says you got to deal with the quality of service somehow, whether you use SN7. I don't know, you're arguing for an SN7, I heard there.
Well, maybe not an SS7, but maybe something that is for a network like what an operating system did for time sharing, to allow multiple applications to optimally use that set of facilities available. Maybe there is a way of taking a look at a more global view of a network and more optimally using the set of facilities available.
So time for one more question, if we have out in the audience.
I have a question for Bob. Is Bob sitting over there someplace? Yes, Bob. So Manchester encoding was a key thing, right? Manchester encoding was also used on deck tapes, and it was used to go and, again, do the kind of clocking on the deck tapes when the tape was coming up to speed and slowing down. It allowed the clock to be maintained even though the tape speed was changing. I was wondering if this had anything to do with your inspiration for using the Manchester encoding on Ethernet.
I was a heavy user of deck tapes, but I did not ever know that they had Manchester encoding on them.
Okay, that answers that one.
And I'll plug deck tape. It was also it had full redundancy. There were two analog signals that were added together. So it was analog adding of redundancy there, and you could actually punch one side of it. And by the way, we can still read deck tapes and link tape, which was the ancestor of deck tape.
So I wanted to comment on the title of this session. So to me, the two key architectural features of the internet, including Ethernet, is the packet switching is an architecture. And in the beginning, yes, departing from circuit switching was a huge architectural step. And then the layering, the ISO layering of the level 1, level 2, up through level 7. That was a really important architectural decision about how to build the internet. Are we about to change? Should we consider changing those two architectural decisions?
I would say it really doesn't matter. I mean, either one of them could have worked just fine. In terms of this whole software-defined networking, everywhere I go, I see these things about what a privilege to be born at this point in history when software-defined networking will transform the planet. It's actually a buzzword that means a whole bunch of different things to different people. The concept of separation of control and data plane, that's been done for a while. Whether you have the the forwarding tables that tell the switches what to do, done with a distributed algorithm or one central place. That's also ATM, InfiniBand, did it with a central thing. You could do either one, so it's not, I don't think any of this stuff is transformational. We can get by, the fact that we can get by on the internet with 4-byte addresses even today is just really astonishing. So I don't think anything will make the difference between the internet working or not.
Well, on that note, I think that's the definition of a very robust architecture.
Yes.
Robust to any change. Why don't we thank our panel? And if I could have our next panel come up and join us, which is focused on standards. We've also heard about the importance of standards and the process of getting standards in the creation of the Ethernet. And so we want to spend a little time taking a look at where those are today, and in fact how things have evolved. So if we could have. Yeah. So I will, in the interest of the haiku introductions, we have Nan at the end and Metro Ethernet, John D'Ambrosia, 802.3, and I'll also use that for Jeff, 802.3, and for Miley, Granite Systems. So with that, I think an interesting place to start is that it took 7 years from the launch of the Ethernet until the actual standard was developed. And one question is today's pace of development, the speed at which we need to develop things. Do we even have time to develop the adequate standards and appropriate standards?
Pick a person.
Go ahead, you're picked.
I'll go. Before we start there, though, I am not 802.11. I am .3, through and through. There are airheads and netheads in 802, and I'm the latter. Moving right along. The 7 or 8 years that Steve talked about, I'm assuming is from invention until the standard was published, although there are a couple other places that you could pick that interval. We made very, very good use of that time. Ethernet was not just an invention which was moved to market as quickly as possible. It was something that was deployed broadly throughout Xerox. We had Xerox's own internet that spanned locations from England to Japan, with altos on it worldwide. And we had an incredible depth of experience with Ethernet as a utility network by the time it was speeded up to 10 meg and introduced to the rest of the world as a product. So the viewpoint that John Schock brought to this microphone when he dealt with some of the issues from IBM about whether these things were important, were firmly, firmly grounded in lots of experience. So I don't think that 7 years is the right number. When we turn something in the Standards Committee from the start of a project to the time we publish a standard, if we get lucky and the timing is right, the standard comes out very close to when the product comes out. And the reason we do that is because we have the right people in the room, that is, the people who are developing it, when we write the standard. The best assurance of a quality standard is that the actual implementers are writing it while they're doing the implementation. In the instances where we get the timing right, it's about 2 or 2.5 years for that cycle, not 7.
I think 7 years is probably too long, especially in the age of move fast and break things. Okay, I deal mostly with young students. My students are freshmen on the way to graduate and senior at Stanford, and I've been trying to drill that in their head, and I do feel guilty. I do feel guilty because I believe in fundamental research that takes time and takes care. However, you know, the question of whether 7 years is too long, too short, is it the right time? I would like to ask, how many of you in the audience are in your 20s? Raise your hand. Okay, so we have, what, 3 or 4? Now, don't lie, because if you say you're 20 and you're not, I'll say I'm 29, okay? If we want to figure out—
How long have I known you?
the life cycle, how the appropriate life cycle of a standard, maybe we should all go ask those people, the upcoming generation. Because don't forget, when we were doing Ethernet, IEEE 802, we were all young folks. We were all in our 20s. And we'll probably sit down thinking,
You were
this
9.
takes too long.
Those were the days in our 20s, right?
Yep.
Well, I don't think 7 years is a relevant number. And I think when we say do a standard, we're losing sight of the fact of what is Ethernet? What really is Ethernet? I mean, right now, we're doing Ethernet projects that rate from DC to 400 gig. DC to 400 gig.
In a 4,000-page, 6-volume
Yeah,
set.
6 volumes, right. So think
So
about
it's not
that.
one standard.
It's not one standard. It's not one application area. We're all over the place. We're doing all sorts of things, and all of these markets are different, and they have their own needs. Now, what has changed? Well, all of these little smartphones out here. Bob, I quote Metcalfe's law all the time. I love it because it helps my argument in terms of bandwidth. All of these people, you're bandwidth consumers, you're bandwidth creators, you're making my life a living hell because I'm the guy stuck there trying to support it as I go from 100 gig to now 400 gig. And Bob, I know you want terabit. So this is what's happening. And it's not a question of whether, you know, the time to do the standards is too much. It's a question of how fast is the need emerging. Really, it's the need that drives things. And it's not just a standardization effort.
But I think that's my point, is that the needs are evolving faster and faster, and they're coming from these people.
So now, when we start to look at the standards effort, what you need to really understand here is that, and Jeff was talking about we, he wasn't referring to the standards. He was referring to us, the industry. Okay, I say that we do not make, the IEEE does not make decisions. Decisions are made at the IEEE by you.
The standards arena is not a self-sustaining entity. It's a meeting place for the industry. Now, some of the time, it looks like it's not that, and some of the time, we produce standards that are not relevant. But when we do things that are relevant, it's because we've succeeded as being an appropriate meeting place for the materially interested parties.
And it's a need-driven thing. There are periods and infamous meetings that we can point to, and you remember Geneva, that there was a tremendous industry need at that point in time where everybody came together and drove things fast. We've got projects that have gone from 15 to 18 months to years. They're really all over the place, but they're driven by consensus, and that's by the industry. So we have to look at that, and I think the problem, as you're pointing out, is that the need is growing faster. We did a project in the IEEE where we went off and looked at industry bandwidth, and what we're looking at is fabric capacities on average needing to support terabit in 2015, 10 terabit in 2020. That scares you.
Actually, dipping back into history, Steve, there was a 7-year project in 802.3. that was basically a deadlock. And all it succeeded in doing was finally publishing a standard in 3 non-compatible parts and missing the market window.
Yeah, we at MEF, it's a little different from you guys.
Yeah.
You guys are old folks, man.
Go ahead, Nan.
Well, we obviously
The only reason we can't see your gray hair, man, is because you shave it off.
Yeah. But regardless, obviously you guys are plumbers from our perspective.
Thank you.
We actually, absolutely. We're running applications on top of it. Ethernet as a service really is an application we develop. So standards are a little faster than what you guys do. It typically take about, somewhere between, a year to 18 months. That's kind of our standards. And then we typically do 3 to 4 each year. So it's quite a bit of pace. But not to say some of the projects didn't take a long time because either the support is not there or deadlocked. But we actually made it easier, from the leadership perspective to get the standards through to really help to move the market along.
Do you find? So we heard the story this morning of trembling in front of Ken Olsen as he said, "What do why are you giving away my technology?" So. Is there an understanding as you work with people of the value of standards and the willingness to participate and give up IP in the right way under the right construct, or is that a struggle that you still have?
I think it's a struggle we have now. I think one of the biggest strengths of Ethernet is that the IP aspect of that was dispensed with at the front end of Ethernet. The fact that Xerox decided to do a fully paid up license on the Ethernet patent set for $1,000 kept the patent wars out of .3 for a number of years, both by that overt act and by that as an example. So the terrible problems we have now with patent issues were actually held off for quite some time by that precedent.
Yeah, and I think the other aspect to this is that the investments that people are making in their IP is becoming more substantial. We're not talking about changing applications and changing software. We're talking about dealing with the laws of physics. And some of the stuff that's being done takes a very good investment. So there's more of a need to protect that investment.
So, and how do we solve that conundrum?
I'm not sure. I think we have our rules in place with the letters of assurance that you'll license it at a reasonable cost, but that's not necessarily protection, and I'm not sure it necessarily helps us. I think if anything, it may in some aspect of deadlock because they don't want to give up because they see the potential if their technology gets selected. So it's a very challenging problem.
So I think it's a very challenging problem from the abstract level of what we would all hope for from a patent system, but also the current situation in the patent system is so dysfunctional that we can't even rise to the level that we all think would be appropriate for handling this.
So, Maya, I really liked your point about who's the audience for these things, right? And where are they going? And so are there some areas where you see things evolving so rapidly that there aren't standards being developed, but there should be?
Oh God, where do I start? Where do I begin? There's so much. I mean, I love what Radia said about, forget about packet size, forget about flat address or, structural address, forget about all those things. What is it that we want? I want shoes. I wear a size 5 running shoes in women, which nobody makes anymore. So I spend a lot of time looking for shoes, funny enough, Radia. And so to me, that's sort of look at the organic structure of what is it that we need. You talk about the need. The need will drive what it is that we need to do. If a bunch of people decide that they want to find a way to post pictures of their friends on the internet, they did it.
right?
They did it in, what, a weekend or 2 weekends or something in the dorm.
And there was no call for interest. There was no standard.
No reference, no RC,
Yeah.
right? And so I think that there are more and more of those things. Having said that, I still see the need to have the grown-up at the table, to have the gray hair, so to speak, to be there to sort of be the adult supervision, because things are changing so fast. Again, the model of build fast and break things is great until you break things.
Many of the big problems that we have now in technology are systems engineering problems. And the facility that the internet has put into place means that there are lots of communication protocols in existence, so the interchange of information is very good and facilitated, and so lots of development costs have dropped. But getting the level of agreement for solving big problems and taking on the systems engineering aspects of those, which is the element interchange so that you have multi-vendor solutions, are really the area where standards can shine. Probably the easiest example to cite would be smart grid, but there are other problems of that scope and ilk that we really need.
That are calling out for
good standards
calling
work,
out
yeah.
for good standards.
Yeah, but I would say that standards are really important, necessary, but I would just kind of gently nudge us into maybe we should think of a new version of it or modified version of it. Take the, I believe, was that Jeff? Was that here? Who sat here in the middle? Glenn talked about the successful business model is to carry a successful brand forward. So Standard, I think, has had is a good brand. We carry it forward, but what can we change in the underlying structure so that it will work better?
So on that note, we've seen the advent of open source.
Yep.
And open source, has some of the value proposition of standards, not all of them, right? But it gives you, it removes the monopolistic advantage of the first mover, and so allows people to, manage the fear of lock-in quite differently. It gives some transparency, so you can have white hats probe things. So, is that a way is that a kind of a 21st century aspect of a standard, that we have open source technologies in our application stack?
Well, open source is a good way to get things started, right? So all those people on this panel have done a lot of standards. The standard not necessarily typically down into details. It's really define the actual interfaces among where you can interact with others in a standard way, and not tell you how to design your product or write your code. But open source certainly could evolve in a standard way or speed up the standard development process, but could potentially be, give people advantage, in terms of maybe first mover advantage, things like that. But is only part of the solution.
So open source can speed time to market and can lower the entry cost for individual entities, but there's no need to write standards down at the line of code level. The standards are for bigger modules for that, where there are conceptual entities that need to communicate with each other.
I don't need open source. I don't need it at the physical layer.
Certainly not at that layer.
And, but one
if where the evolution is happening, as my points out, is at much higher in the system.
Yes.
And are we losing some of the benefits of standards, or is that a different way to get some of the benefit?
I would have to defer to the people who are dealing in that space to answer those questions. They're the ones that have to deal with those issues. I think where we're saying is that at the physical layer, it's not an open source issue. It's more going back to the IP issue and the investment in there, which ties back to the fact that what we're doing at the physical layer is providing a stable foundation for everybody, to do all of the applications and such and services that you want to offer. You still need to have a fundamental, stable ground that's defined by a process which we call standards.
So Nan, maybe talk about for the MEF then, the standards. What what are they about? At what layer are they?
We writing on the Ethernet. These guys are obviously pioneered. Everybody in the room. So we're really developing, if you would, an Ethernet business model where allow the carriers start selling Ethernet services, and that's really is on top of what the Ethernet pipe has been defined, has been standardized, so allow us to deliver that services. And that service development, what we call a carrier Ethernet. If you think of the Ethernet initially, it was defined more from their perspectives, more of speed and feed. We kind of gone into a different dimension, which is really about service. Services being offered on Ethernet. Even though we coined it as carrier Ethernet, it's really about the carrier Ethernet services these people can sell and buy, so that you can have an interconnected world with the Ethernet, all over.
It's packaging and management. It's productizing the service.
It is. It's productizing the service. We hardly ever deal with actual protocols. Really about how the service is standardized, how the service, how the interface is supposed to be between different carriers. How do you buy and sell services between carriers? How do you offer that services? You're replacing the T1s world where enterprises are asking today. And in fact, I'll just have a really interesting statistics of where last year marked the first year that the aggregate bandwidth of Ethernet services sold worldwide exceeded the combination of all legacy data services. So that's by vertical systems. So it's marking a tremendous progress we made, since MEF started. So we really see that trend continue to grow. That gave you justification to do that at 400 gig.
Right. So at that level, then it also there is a faster rate that's required.
Oh, absolutely.
Because that services layer is evolving then much faster. So
yeah.
how do you meet that speed?
Yeah. So we, at MEF, we have multiple methodologies developing standards, and it has a lot of things we do a certification program on, which really enforce the standards we developed very quickly. And also, in addition, at the leadership level, we actually somewhat prioritize the things we wanted to get accomplished, even though it's like IEEE. A lot of members has to be contributing. But if you line up the priorities, things going to get done a lot faster for the things you want to get done. So that's one of the things. The second thing is, we also talked about the certification program, which is MEF has implemented, really helping to enforce that standards that be implemented very quickly, and people pick up very quickly.
So let me stop and open it up to the audience, see if we've got any questions.
Okay, so Sean Hackett. I'm from an analyst firm, 451 Research, and I'm from the US, obviously. Boston, if you can detect the... So I'm kind of an outsider. I'm not don't really cover the network space. I cover, which I haven't heard yet, and I'm shocked, cloud computing, right? And when we start talking about standards in 7 years, and for me, I'm not 20, I'm at the later half of 30, but for me, things like OpenStack, right? I mean, where we have this loose sort of federation of now, I think it's like 200 companies, right, contributing. 7 years is a lifetime for folks there. I mean, look at where we've come since like 2012, 2010, 11. So for me, I mean, this is a little bit more of a comment, and I think might sort of address this. Things innovate fast, get broken fast, and fixed fast, and this industry at a higher layer isn't waiting for regulations and standards to happen, just innovating, right? And my take when I listen to this, and with all due respect to the innovations that have happened, is those at the higher tier aren't going to wait. I mean, they're not going to wait for standards to happen. They're just going to innovate and somehow develop this. So I guess the question I would have here is, how is that, I mean, how is that influencing, and maybe other folks here, how is that influencing the network? I mean, how is that influencing at lower tiers, this innovation that's happening at a higher tier?
My answer to that, based on many years of experience, is, and to Steve's opening question, is that at my level, which is a hardware level, and it varies slightly, is the half-life of standards participation is 18 months. And you have to orient everything that you do around how long you can keep people. They have a fixed attention span, which is driven by the nature of their business and the nature of their funding to participate. And if you can't turn a standard around within the window of participation that you're given by that, you don't have a standards organization.
Well, and the way I kind of answer that is we have actually seen, if you look at all the technologies and with the standards associated with it, they're always pioneers in that particular area where they're actually really developing the prototype or the first mover advantage, so to speak. And then that's lead to the belief that there is a market for it, and that should be the justification for standards. I don't think we need everything need to be standardized. It's just the fact that if they need many people in the industry to be able to develop something and develop that particular market or market big enough, then standard would evolve, as required. And I think it's a lot of the people taking leadership. If you just think about Ethernet, you started, Bob, or even before that, before 3Com, the people already developing the overall Ethernet concept, and eventually evolve into Ethernet standards. So I guess my point is that you always have pioneers to go in front of the standards, and then if there's a market for standards, then it happens. So OpenStack is the same way, where people start doing it. If there's a need for the standardization, then the standard would actually take care of themselves.
So once again, and this kind of goes to some of the other conversations earlier about why is it taking so long to do things, the problems that we're having, the cross disciplines. Let's remember, we work in an ecosystem. Nan needs hardware. He needs the pipes to run his services. Pipes without services, who needs them? So when we're talking 7 years, we're not talking about 7 years over everything, right? And frankly, I can cite examples that disprove your point about people don't need standards. There are applications and spaces out there where people have waited and insisted on having a standard. But you can't just blindly apply that to every aspect of the Ethernet ecosystem merely because it says Ethernet in it. And we do need to keep that in mind. And that's why that you see things maybe taking a little longer because it's jumping across different spaces. I don't know, when we talk about introducing a service, where do you really say the standard started? Did it start with the beginning of the pipe? Is it just the development of the service that was on top of that pipe? It's one thing building on top of another. And it's just like that with the things that we do. So I'm not doing anything with OpenStack. It's not in my area, but I'm not that person. There is somebody else out there like me who's doing that. They're just not on the panel right now.
Yeah, but that didn't necessarily need a standards, right?
Last question, please.
Yeah.
That when this took 7 years, we had no email. We had no PCs. I'm sure Jeff remembers as well as I do, packing to go to the meeting, making sure we had all the files of all the documents we needed to reference to take with us. It used to take me a few hours to pack documents to go to the meeting with that trade-off of how much it weighed versus how much I needed, and then to put the files back. I mean, one of the things I love about computers is when I take a file out to look at it, I don't have to put it back. It's still there. So, we did this with no laptops, with transparencies, with virtually no email. There was just starting to be some email.
We did it for the first 15 years.
And that made it take longer. It is amazing how much networks and laptops and good email and all that has improved that process. So, you know, when we talk about it taking 2 years or 3 years to do a standard, you know, basically the first few months of that are figuring out that we want to do something and what we need to do. And then it takes about, generally, except in cases where we've got deadlock and political problems, it takes generally, you know, 6 months to a year to get written down really what we want, and the concepts down, and people are well along in implementing. And then the rest of the time is making sure the language is right, making sure it's all consistent and correct, and kind of the last balloting it, everybody looking through it with a fine-tooth comb and making sure it's clear, because it's that clarity that gets us interoperability and allows the people who weren't in the room to implement as well as the people who were in the room. So really, it's quite fast compared to where we started.
I think we should let that be the last comment, and because I believe they're set up for lunch. Is that correct? You want to come up and introduce, or should I just send them off? We can send them off. All right. Thank you to the panel, and lunch awaits. Thank you. Very good.
I said I've had a fascinating time. Don't leave the room yet. I've just got a couple of things I'd like to say before you disappear. And in particular, I've got Mark Webber here from the Computer History Museum who'd like to make a couple of quick announcements, including one about the robot at the back. I call them avatars, robots, whatever. Anyway, Mark, a quick word. Where are you? There you go.
I'm Mark Webber, founder and curator of the Internet History Program here at the museum, and I'm truly thrilled that we have this historic as well as forward-looking celebration here today. To help mark the occasion, we'll be releasing 5 transcripts of never-before-seen interviews from the James Pelkey collection. Bob Metcalf, Gordon Bell, John Davidson, David Liddell, and Bruce Hunt, all recorded in the late 1980s. You'll be able to find the links to them on a new museum blog entry this evening. We also have more recent interviews with some of these pioneers in our collection of more than 600 video oral histories, so feel free to compare and contrast. Jim Pelkey, who recently finished his book on the early history of networking and is a core advisor to the Internet History Program, will be joining us later via a Beam telepresence robot, courtesy of Suitable Technology and its founder, Scott Hassan. Assuming the Wi-Fi is up to snuff, we're also expecting a virtual visit from Vince Cerf, from trustee and computing architecture pioneer Gardner Hendry, who may be in the back of the room right now, and possibly from another surprise visitor. CHM is the first historical institution with a comprehensive Internet history program, as well as the first major exhibit galleries on the origins of the online world, which you'll have a chance to tour before dinner. The Internet History Program actively collects materials on the history of networking. If you know of materials you think that we should consider, please talk to me today or tomorrow. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. And just to say, I believe there will be transcripts available. I've been tweeting away like a tweetery thing this morning on using the hashtag Ethernet40, that's 40. So if you want to catch up with what people have said, that's the way to do it. Other than that, I'd like to say enjoy your lunch, and I'll speak to you a bit later. Thanks.